Today, I am going to continue talking about the two truths, which is relative truth and ultimate truth. And the first talk that I gave, I talked about the development of the self using the five skandhas as the traditional way that this is discussed. So the importance of knowing how we develop this idea of a self that is solid, unique, independent, and so forth is so that we can understand it a little better, understand the functioning of our mind, understanding our confusion a little better. The essence of these five skandhas and our self is that it is impermanent, and that any happiness or suffering that we experience is also impermanent. And ideally, this can help lessen our attachment and clinging to our version of reality. So to continue on this line, this is all about interdependence. And here is a definition of interdependence: the absence of independent or stable inherent existence. And there are two types of interdependence. One is the interdependence of arisal, and this has to do with karma, cause and effect. The other type of interdependence is described as the status is entirely relative to things around it. And I'll explain that briefly and then go into a deeper explanation of the interdependence of arisal. But the idea of the status being entirely relative to things around it, what this means is that in our world, the things that we experience, we do it in a comparative relationship. So we make the difference between men and women, that men are different than women, women are different than men, and we impute that difference to other rather than being something that we are projecting from our own minds, that these are inherent qualities. And the very fact today of how big an issue sexual identity is, and being transsexual and bisexual and every other type of identity, it shows how it's not solid. So to get back to then the idea of interdependence of arisal and causality, what is used here is the 12 links of interdependent origination. And this is analysis based on a time sequence. This happens first, then next that happens, and then after that, something else happens. And again, it's causal. And it's actually very similar to Western scientific analysis of causality. In the transcript that I am basing kind of the outline of this teaching, of Rinpoche's, Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche's teaching, the transcript is teaching on emptiness and interdependence. And in that transcript, he divides this causality into 4 types that are incorrect. There are 4 possibilities of causality that are not interdependent. And the first is there's a permanent cause, and this would be theistic, that there is a higher power that is causing things to happen. And in Buddhism, this is rejected, that there is a first cause, for instance, a beginning. The Buddha talked about the beginningless beginning. The second is a non-existent cause. And what that means is that something that is a cause totally ceases with its arising and completely disappears. And the Buddhist, they were both experts in logic, but also experts in observing their mind and watching how things arise and so forth. They felt that was totally impossible to have this, not have this relationship. The third is things arise without a cause. And that could be described as nihilism, that things just happen randomly, that there is no real cause. And as a result, if you adhere to that, it develops into eat, drink, and be merry. Do whatever you want to, because it doesn't matter that there are no consequences from your actions, whether they be good or negative. And the fourth type of cause that is refuted by interdependence is causes that are other than themselves. And Rinpoche didn't go into this in very much depth. Being a Khenpo, he could have, no doubt. But what this means is that these are causes that are disguised or hidden. And as Buddhists, we reject that as well. So interdependent arising is free of all and any of these extreme views. Now, I have a quote from Jamgon Kongtrul III, and it is, the 12 links of interdependence are, quote, the active workings of karma that is compared to a water wheel, end quote. The point being is when these 12 links are depicted on the tanka of Wheel of Life, they are in the outer ring and they're a bit like a water wheel. You have, it's a donut that circles it and that has 12 different panels. And once you begin with the first panel, you automatically then progress to the second, to the third, to the fourth, until you get to the 12th. And then you're back to where you started in panel number 1. So this describes how samsara works. And these 12 links, these 12 panels, look at 3 lifetimes. Again, with causal analysis and this sequence of time. And so the way this works is the first link, it looks at the previous lifetime. And the first link is called ignorance. And this is the lifetime that we were born into in our previous life. We had no control over the conditions of our birth and which realm we were born in. It was a result of our karma. And the point being that samsara starts with active ignorance. It's more than just not knowing or recognizing the ultimate nature of things. It is taking that which is not a self to be a self, and that which is not other to be other. So it is more than just not recognizing the way things actually are. It is projecting a false narrative. And so we perceive our experience to be solid, permanent, and real rather than just experience. And this ignorance is individual. It's not a group sort of phenomena that we are born and we aren't ignorant, but then the group that we're born into, let's say our parents, our culture, our family, relatives, and so forth are, and then we catch it from them. It has been there right from the beginningless beginning. So from this idea of having an independent inherent self, we become attached to I, and we become attached to whatever promotes I, and whatever leads to the I experiencing pleasure. And then the opposite happens. Anything that threatens the I or is considered not I is looked at with aversion. And we try to separate ourselves from that. And finally, there is another form of ignorance, which could be described as stupidity, a lack of common sense, denial, and so forth. And this type of ignorance is a klesha. It is just plain not paying attention to what's going on in your life and denying it and ignoring it and so forth. So that's more passive, but this basic ignorance is active. So from that beginning, then we are fully involved in samsara. And that leads to the next wheel or the next panel in this, like a water wheel. And this is called formation. And this is karmic formation, that we have now the I present. We have actions that are based on I and the afflicted states of mind, of attachment, aversion, and stupidity or ignoring things. And we continue in our life accumulating more and more karma based on our actions that are motivated by these afflictions. And that leads then to two consequences in terms of where we are going. The first is that we are creating the seeds of the circumstances that we will experience in our next life, our present life. So we are creating the seeds that will lead to happiness and suffering in our next life and future lives. And so this is based on our present actions. And then we're also developing tendencies, karmic conditions, habitual patterns, habitual ways of seeing things, habitual ways of reacting to things when they arise in our lives, and so forth. So this is why it is called formation. And when this is drawn out in picture form, it's a picture of a potter throwing pots. You might say forming things, making shapes. That leads to consciousness. This is the third link of interdependence. And what this is really it's momentum. Momentum from our past life, and now we are moving towards our next life. This is the karma that propels us to rebirth. And it is frequently described as like a bow that's pulled back with an arrow in it, and you let go of it. And consciousness is the momentum that propels the arrow. And for most people, there is no control over where the arrow goes. It's controlled by our karmic seeds from formation. And wherever the arrow hits, it sticks to. Then the next one is, this is the fourth link of interdependence. It's name and form. So this is the beginning of rebirth. This is where the 5 skandhas develop that I talked about earlier. This is where our body starts to form in the womb if we're taking a human rebirth. It's called name and form. Form then has to do specifically with the 4 elements of earth, water, fire, and air that make up the substance of the body. This is using the traditional Tibetan way of looking at the physical world. And then name is the other 4 skandhas. Form is the first skandha. The other skandhas are feeling, that's the second skandha. And this is input from our 6 senses, the 5 of the body, plus our mental consciousness. The third skandha is perception and conceptualization, that we judge our experiences and our attachments and aversion and so forth. The fourth one is will or intention, our reaction and so forth. And then the 5th one is consciousness. And these are our thoughts and emotions. So this is this 4th link of interdependence, name and form. So now we are, you might say, ready for the 5th one. In fact, we have no choice. We have no freedom to avoid the 5th one. Once we had the 4th one, and once we had the 3rd one, we had no choice. We had to experience the 4th one. So this is perceptual entrances. So this is the development of our senses, our sense organs, our sense consciousnesses, and our body in general. And so we're keeping developing and developing and developing. Then the next is contact. Everything has developed enough to the point where we start experiencing the outer world. Again, it's unavoidable. And once there's been contact, now we have the 7th link, and that is sensation. Some are pleasant, some are unpleasant, but they happen. We cannot stay still with the feeling. This is a quote, and it's very effective. It drives us. Pleasurable feelings generate a strong drive for more. Pain generates a strong drive to avoid. That leads then to the 8th link, which is desire. And this is the desire to continue pleasant experiences, the desire to end unpleasant experiences. So already we are creating the conditions for future lives. right from, you might say, the get-go, we are already planting seeds that will just keep us spinning in samsara. The ninth link is addiction. And you could say this is dissatisfaction. It's wanting the pleasant experiences and sensations to continue and intensify, and the desire to totally avoid negative ones. And so this just magnifies and intensifies the karma from our negative actions. We make plans to continue pleasant experiences, plans to avoid unpleasant experiences. We want the desire to be total. So it's just continuous addiction to one pleasant experience after another, and a continuous addiction to avoid one unpleasant experience after another. And you could say it's the same thing for apathy, denial, indifference, that we just keep intensifying our karma created by these three afflictive states of mind of desire, aversion, and stupidity. Basically, we become addicted to samsara. That leads to the 10th link of interdependence, and this is described as becoming. This is about the bardo, and then repeating the process all over again. This is the beginning of your future life, that at some point, our body runs out of the good karma that keeps it alive, and we die. And we've accumulated enough karma necessary for our next life. And this is basically the same point as the end of karmic creation. So becoming begins with dying, and then it is the bardo experience. It's the end of the second life. And again, we have no control of this process. It just happens, and we have no ability to, you might say, get out. So it is absolutely necessary that we be reborn in samsara when our body dies. And that leads to the 11th link, and that is called birth. So this is the beginning of the actual third life, where you are born. Your body forms in the womb if it's a human birth. Now it emerges. And this is what's called dependent arising. It is arising due to the karmic conditions that have been accumulated. And the type of birth that you have is determined by karmic conditions. And so here we go again, and we experience all kinds of things according to our karma. We experience suffering, and we experience happiness. And frequently go through and have similar experiences over and over again because we're stuck, we're in a rut. We keep, because of our mental conditioning, reacting the same way over and over and over again. And so in that life, this future life, we just keep on accumulating more and more and more karma. And eventually we reach old age and death. Again, it's unavoidable. And that is the 12th link, which is aging and death. So our body gets older and our body begins to deteriorate if it's a natural death. Could be an accidental death too, but if it's not accidental, then we experience aging. And in between birth and death, there are lots of experiences of suffering. And now we die, and that's the end of the third life. And then this wheel, then the link number 12 is right next to link number 1, and we're back to link number 1 and keep going around and around endlessly. So samsara, this describes samsara, and it's made up of 3 elements that are in these 12 links. And this is how it is divided. One part of samsara is that it's made up of afflicted actions and the resultant karma. These are links number 2, formation, and number 10, becoming. The second aspect of samsara is mental afflictions, our kleshas. This is link number 1, ignorance, number 8, desire, number 9, addiction. And these are the causes of the afflicted actions that were mentioned in number 1. The third element of samsara is suffering. This is the truth of suffering, the first noble truth. And these are links 3, consciousness, 4, name and form, 5, perceptual entrances, 6, contact, 7, sensation, 11, birth, and 12, aging and death. So that is how this is applied to samsara and the situation that we're in and relative reality, what we as samsaric beings experience and why we experience it. On the other hand, the truth of suffering is conventional reality. It is true because of the link between cause and the experience of suffering. But the experience is not permanent, and it is not unchanging. It is impermanent, and these experiences change. It is, however, valid in terms of being consistent. It's not random, and it's not caused by a higher power. And this goes back to what I was talking about earlier. It's not, it avoids the extreme of nihilism and the extreme of theism. It's consistent. So now the other type of interdependence is that of relativity. And I'm going to go into this a little bit more here. One way to look at this is everything has relatives. That in order to have existence, there has to be non-existence. In order for better, we need worse. Good and bad, night and day. And we experience everything based on these relative imputations, and they are our imputations. It may be that our friends share these imputations. It may be that most of the world shares these imputations. But we don't vote on reality. Just because everybody feels that these are real doesn't mean that they are. Here is a quote from Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche. Our imputation is that what we experience actually has these inherent values, and that these values are characteristics. as opposed to being mere comparative imputations, which is what they are. So this is very important, that we compare things, but these comparisons are all relative, that what is small can suddenly turn large, depending upon what you're comparing it to. When I was a young man, I was in a room for the first time of all Japanese Americans. And ordinarily, I consider myself relatively short, but there I could see over their heads across the room. And I was suddenly tall. And that's the way it is. And the way we experience things is through our five senses. And some human beings have impaired senses. Some are blind, some are hearing impaired, and so forth. You can have your senses altered by certain drugs that you take too. And an animal will have different sense abilities than a human. Some dogs have very sharp senses of smell and smell things that we are not aware of, and so forth. And we have to realize this, that we are experiencing things through our conditioning, our cultural conditioning, and through our human senses. And that is a limitation. In terms of characteristics, an example that I like is hot peppers. And I, all my life, have eaten relatively mildly seasoned foods. And I have met a lot of people from Tibet and Nepal and India that like highly spiced foods. When we have had a lama here, sometimes we have put out a plate of hot peppers, sliced up and put it on the table, and the lama not only ate all of them for breakfast, but licked the plate. Whereas I would not want to even touch what was on that plate, much less put it in my mouth, because it would be painful for me. Is it in the peppers, or is it in the person that's sensing them, experiencing them? So it's important to realize this, that these are not qualities of the object. It's what we are projecting onto the object. Another example is a singing bowl, a Tibetan singing bowl, which I don't have an example of here to hold. But you have a little striker and you hit them, and it makes a very pleasant noise, and it kind of grabs your attention and you can focus on it. And when my parents had downsized, they had traveled the world, by the way, after Dad retired. And when they downsized, I got lots and lots of boxes of stuff from them. And in one of them, I found a singing bowl. And it had been used to put a plant in, a flower pot. It wasn't filled with dirt and a plant in it, but there was a flower pot with a plant in it. And that's how Dad perceived that singing bowl. Yet we get so hung up thinking that what we are imputing on an object is real and the way it is. And we can even start arguing with other people when they are imputing something else to that same object. So if we can understand this interdependence of relativity, we can start realizing that the way we see things is not solid. It's just our way of seeing things, and our experience is just our experience. And this can lead us to an understanding of karma and how it works. And what that then can lead to is understanding that, quote, because the only thing that needs to cease to attain liberation is the false imputation of inherent existence to experience, end quote. We don't have to make external appearances disappear or cease or even to be avoided. We just can start understanding that they have no inherent existence. So the ultimate reality is not the cessation of relative reality. It's not an alternative reality. And it's not the cessation of experience. It is just realizing that what we experience is interdependent, it's constantly changing, and it is not solid. And on top of that, the ultimate is not separate from the relative, and the relative is not separate from the ultimate. The relative is the relative of the ultimate, and the ultimate is the ultimate of the relative. We don't have two different realities, just two different ways of experiencing. So I'm going to finish here with a quote from this transcript of Rinpoche's. Prajnaparamita, or the perfection of knowledge, is simply, from the point of view of hearing and contemplation, it is the understanding of the nature of things, which is interdependence. And from the point of view of meditation, it is the direct realization or the complete experience of this nature. The question was to go over 10 and 11, the links 10 and 11. Number 10 is becoming. And this is about the experience of dying, going through the bardo, and then headed for your future rebirth. That at this point we have accumulated all the karma necessary to propel us to our next life. And this is based on karmic creation. We have little to no control of the process, although we did just discuss that to a good practitioner, that we can attain liberation in bardo, and that this leads to link number 11, which is birth. So here you, the male and the female elements of the body, if you're taking a human rebirth, the form in the womb of the mother, the father's sperm and the mother's egg join in the womb, and consciousness enters the body, the new body, the egg and the sperm at that point. And then in 9 months, a baby comes out. And all of this is due to just the normal processes of birth. And this is what's called dependent arising. And then once we are born, then we experience all kinds of things in that next life. I had a request to go over number 6, and link number 6 is contact. And this is unavoidable, like the others. And what happens is we have our sense consciousnesses, and we're starting to have contact. Our senses are starting to have contact with outer objects, and we're experiencing the outer world. And so this part, again, is unavoidable. The question is that when we're in the womb, are we already developing habits and creating karma? I've never heard this question discussed, but I am going to speculate that we are at some point, because for those of you, I was married and my wife was pregnant. We had a son, and he was jumping around as he got older and older, kicking, and you could tell when he was, you might say, moving and awake. And so there's something going on inside of that womb that it's just not, what would I say, being totally spaced out. There's a consciousness is involved here. But a lot is going on. And so that's my answer to that.